Most people think they understand anger. They see it as destructive, primitive, something to be suppressed and controlled. They admire those who never lose their temper, who never raise their voice, who remain perpetually calm and collected. Society has taught you to view these individuals as evolved, mature, and spiritually advanced. You couldn't be more wrong. Carl Jung, the pioneering psychologist who dared to explore the darkest corners of the human psyche, issued a warning that most people refuse to acknowledge. The individuals who never express anger aren't enlightened. They're the most dangerous people you'll ever encounter. Jung understood something that conventional wisdom actively obscures. Suppressed anger doesn't disappear. It transforms into something far more sinister. While you're admiring someone's apparent emotional control, Jung recognizes that you're witnessing the most sophisticated form of psychological warfare. These people haven't transcended anger. They've weaponized it. They've learned to channel their rage into methods of manipulation so subtle, so calculated, that their victims never see it coming. Here's what no one wants to tell you. Every single day, you're surrounded by individuals whose calm exterior masks a seething interior. They've discovered that overt anger makes you a target, but covert anger makes you untouchable. While everyone else loses their composure and reveals their hand, these psychological predators maintain perfect emotional camouflage. Jung spent decades studying the human shadow, those aspects of personality that we refuse to acknowledge. He discovered that people who claim to have no anger haven't eliminated their shadow. They've become it. They've integrated their darkness so completely that they can deploy it without conscious awareness, maintaining plausible deniability even to themselves. You think you're safe because they never yell. You trust them because they never lose control. You confide in them because they seem so understanding, so patient, so wise. This is exactly what makes them terrifying. The comfortable lie that society sells you is that emotional suppression equals emotional mastery. The brutal truth that Jung uncovered is that people who never get angry have simply found more efficient ways to destroy you. They've learned that a smile can inflict more damage than a scream, that silence can wound deeper than words, and that calculated kindness can break someone more thoroughly than obvious cruelty. Continue believing the pleasant fiction that anger is always destructive, and you'll remain vulnerable to those who've mastered the art of invisible warfare. Continue assuming that people who never lose their temper are trustworthy, and you'll never see the knife until it's already between your ribs. But if you're ready to confront the uncomfortable reality about human nature, if you're prepared to understand why Jung considered perpetually calm people the most dangerous forces in any social environment, then what I'm about to reveal will fundamentally change how you navigate human relationships. The stakes couldn't be higher. Here's the first truth that will make you question everyone you've ever trusted. Anger is a fundamental human emotion designed to signal boundaries, defend resources, and establish social hierarchy. When someone claims they never get angry, they're not advertising superior emotional control. They're revealing that they've found alternative methods for achieving dominance. Think about this carefully. Anger serves specific evolutionary functions. It mobilizes energy for confrontation, communicates serious intent to potential threats, and establishes clear boundaries that others must respect. These aren't design flaws in human psychology. They're features that have ensured our survival for millennia. So what happens when someone never displays this crucial emotional response? Jung understood that the anger doesn't vanish, it goes underground. It becomes what he called shadow projection, the unconscious tendency to manipulate others into expressing the emotions you refuse to acknowledge in yourself. Have you ever noticed how some perpetually calm people seem to be surrounded by chaos? How do arguments erupt around them while they remain mysteriously untouched? How does their presence somehow trigger explosive reactions in others? This isn't a coincidence. It's psychological manipulation so sophisticated that even they might not be consciously aware of what they're doing. The never angry person has learned to push emotional buttons with surgical precision while maintaining perfect deniability. They make subtle comments that undermine your confidence. They ask innocent questions that highlight your insecurities. They offer helpful suggestions that somehow make you feel inadequate. And when you finally react with anger or frustration, they respond with concerned sympathy that makes you feel like you're the problem. Society has conditioned you to admire this behavior. You've been trained to believe that the person who never loses their temper is more mature, more professional, and more spiritually advanced than those who express anger directly. This conditioning makes you a perfect target for psychological manipulation. As Jung observed, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. The never angry person has reversed this dynamic. Instead of using irritation for self-understanding, they've learned to create irritation in others while appearing blameless. Consider the most dangerous people in history. They weren't the ones screaming in the streets or throwing public tantrums. They were the ones who smiled while orchestrating destruction, who spoke softly while wielding absolute power, and who maintained perfect composure while eliminating their enemies. Dictators, cult leaders, and master manipulators all share one characteristic. They never lose emotional control in public. The biological reality is that anger triggers fight or flight responses that make strategic thinking more difficult. When you're angry, you're reactive, impulsive, and easier to predict and counter. The never angry person has realized that by remaining calm while making others angry, they gain an enormous strategic advantage. But here's where it gets truly sinister. They've often convinced themselves they're the good guys. Their ability to remain calm while others lose control reinforces their sense of superiority. They genuinely believe their emotional suppression makes them more evolved, when in reality, it's made them more effective predators. You've been taught to see anger as the enemy, when the real enemy is the person who's learned to deploy anger indirectly. You've been conditioned to trust those who never raise their voice, when you should be most suspicious of people who never reveal their true emotional state. The uncomfortable truth is that healthy anger is protective. It warns you when boundaries are being crossed, when you're being disrespected, when you need to defend yourself. People who never get angry have essentially disabled their protective mechanisms, and yours. Now we venture into truly dangerous territory, where the comfortable illusions completely fall away. The second truth Jung understood is that people who never express anger have developed what psychologists call covert aggression, a form of hostility so subtle and sophisticated that it's nearly impossible to identify, let alone defend against. While you're looking for obvious signs of conflict, they're waging psychological warfare with weapons you don't even recognize. Here's where it becomes terrifying. Covert aggression is far more destructive than overt anger because it systematically undermines reality itself. When someone yells at you, you know you're under attack. You can defend yourself, set boundaries, or remove yourself from the situation. But when someone deploys covert aggression, they attack your sense of reality so subtly that you begin to question your perceptions. They excel at gaslighting, making you doubt your memories, intuitions, and emotional responses. They'll make statements that are technically true, but emotionally devastating. They'll offer compliments that somehow leave you feeling worse about yourself. They'll provide support that increases your dependence on them. Watch how this plays out in everyday life. The never angry parent controls their children through guilt and disappointment rather than confrontation. The colleague who undermines your projects through helpful suggestions and concerned observations. The partner who makes you feel like you're overreacting every time you express displeasure with their behavior. These people have discovered something that society refuses to acknowledge. Emotional manipulation is far more effective than emotional expression. While everyone else is being trained to suppress their anger, they're being rewarded for their ability to remain calm under pressure. This creates a perfect storm where the most manipulative people appear to be the most trustworthy. Jung recognized that the modern world creates ideal conditions for covert aggression to flourish. Professional environments reward emotional control. Social media allows for anonymous psychological attacks. Therapeutic language gets weaponized to invalidate legitimate concerns. The very systems designed to promote psychological health become tools for sophisticated manipulation. The dichotomy is clear. Some people express their emotions honestly, making themselves vulnerable but authentic, and some people have learned to manipulate emotions without appearing to have any. The first group includes the most genuinely good people, along with some who lack emotional regulation skills. The second group is almost exclusively composed of individuals who've learned to exploit the emotional honesty of others. As Carl Jung wrote, the most dangerous person is the one who listens, thinks, and observes. The never angry person has perfected the art of observing your emotional patterns, thinking strategically about your vulnerabilities, and listening for information they can later use against you. Consider workplace dynamics. The never angry manager who delivers criticism through concerned questions. Don't you think your approach might be confusing to clients? The colleague who offers to help with your presentation and then makes subtle changes that undermine your credibility. The team member never objects to additional work, but somehow ensures others carry the burden. They've learned that confrontation creates enemies, while covert manipulation creates victims who don't even realize they've been attacked. You leave interactions with them feeling unsettled, but unable to articulate why. You find yourself constantly second-guessing decisions you feel confident about. You begin to rely on their input because they seem so reasonable, so thoughtful, so concerned about your well-being. This is psychological warfare disguised as emotional maturity. The never angry person has essentially figured out how to maintain all the benefits of aggressive behavior: dominance, resource acquisition, territory control, while avoiding all the social costs. They get what they want without appearing to want anything. They eliminate threats without seeming threatening. They establish dominance while appearing supportive. Modern psychology has given them an entire vocabulary to weaponize. They don't attack your ideas. They express concern about your emotional state. They don't insult you. They suggest you might benefit from professional help. They don't argue with you. They validate your feelings while subtly undermining your logic. You've been conditioned to see this as sophisticated communication when it's sophisticated predation. You've been trained to appreciate their emotional intelligence when what you're witnessing is emotional exploitation. The most chilling aspect is their ability to remain completely calm while systematically destroying someone's sense of reality and self-worth. They can drive someone to complete a psychological breakdown while appearing to be nothing but helpful and supportive throughout the entire process. Here's where Jung's warning becomes crucial to your psychological survival. The most terrifying aspect of never angry people isn't their manipulation tactics. It's their ability to recruit your mind as their weapon. The third truth reveals the deepest level of psychological horror that Jung identified. These individuals don't just manipulate your external circumstances, they infiltrate your internal dialogue. They become the voice in your head that questions your reactions, minimizes your concerns, and convinces you that their perspective is more rational than your instincts. Pay attention to the mechanism. They establish themselves as the reasonable authority in any relationship. Through their consistent emotional control, they position themselves as more mature, more logical, and more objective than anyone who expresses normal human emotions. Once this dynamic is established, your emotional responses begin to feel excessive by comparison. You start editing yourself. You second-guess your reactions before expressing them. You find yourself apologizing for having normal emotional responses to abnormal situations. You begin to internalize their standard of perpetual calm as the measure of psychological health. This is where Jung's understanding of the shadow becomes crucial. The never angry person has found a way to make you carry their shadow for them. All the anger, frustration, and negative emotions they refuse to acknowledge get projected onto you. You become the emotional one in the relationship, while they remain the voice of reason. The biological reality is that emotions contain information. Anger tells you when boundaries are being violated. Frustration indicates that your needs aren't being met. Anxiety warns you about potential threats. When someone constantly invalidates these emotional signals, they're essentially training you to ignore your protective instincts. Here's the test that happens beneath conscious awareness. They systematically violate small boundaries while maintaining perfect emotional composure. Each time you react with appropriate emotion to inappropriate behavior, they respond with calm concern about your emotional state. Over time, you learn that expressing displeasure with their behavior results in the focus being shifted to your overreaction. This creates a psychological trap that's almost impossible to escape. The more they violate your boundaries, the more emotional your responses become. The more emotional your responses become, the more reasonable their concern about your emotional state appears. Eventually, you're so focused on moderating your emotional reactions that you completely lose sight of what triggered them in the first place. Jung understood that this dynamic occurs in families, workplaces, relationships, and even entire cultures. The never angry person becomes the emotional thermostat, maintaining their comfortable temperature while everyone around them either freezes or burns. Attempting to fight this directly leads to certain failures because you're fighting the wrong battle. The moment you try to prove that your emotional responses are justified, you've already lost. You're now debating your right to have feelings, rather than addressing the behavior that triggered those feelings. The never angry person has essentially discovered how to make their problems become your problems, their emotions become your emotions, and their responsibilities become your responsibilities, all while appearing to be nothing but supportive and understanding. They've learned that they don't need to control your actions if they can control your perceptions. They don't need to win arguments if they can make you question whether your position is worth arguing for. They don't need to eliminate their enemies if they can convince their enemies to eliminate themselves. The most sophisticated operators can maintain this dynamic for decades, leaving a trail of people who've been psychologically destroyed, while everyone remembers them as supportive, understanding, and impossibly patient with difficult people. You might be thinking about someone right now. Someone who never seems to get upset, who always appears reasonable, who somehow manages to remain calm while chaos erupts around them. Someone whose presence in your life correlates with an increase in your emotional instability. The test is simple. Do you find yourself constantly explaining and justifying your emotional reactions when you're around them? Do conversations about their behavior somehow always end up being conversations about your response to their behavior? Do you feel like you're always walking on eggshells, trying to maintain their impossible standard of emotional control? Jung's warning was clear. The person who never gets angry has found a way to make everyone else angry on their behalf, then positioned themselves as the authority on appropriate emotional expression. They've weaponized wisdom literature, therapeutic language, and spiritual concepts to create an environment where their victims participate in their psychological destruction. This isn't emotional regulation. It's emotional manipulation raised to the level of art form. But here's the ultimate truth that Jung understood, the one that transforms this terrifying knowledge into liberating wisdom. Once you recognize these dynamics, you become immune to them. The path to freedom isn't learning to suppress your emotions like they do. That would just make you another predator in the system. The path to liberation is understanding that your emotional responses are information, not character defects. Your anger isn't a problem to be solved. It's a boundary-setting mechanism to be respected. Here are the pillars of psychological freedom that Jung's work reveals. 1. Trust your emotional reality. Your feelings are valid responses to actual circumstances. When someone constantly triggers negative emotions while appearing blameless, trust the pattern rather than the individual incidents. Your nervous system is detecting something your conscious mind hasn't yet recognized. 2. Maintain emotional sovereignty. Never allow another person to become the authority on your internal experience. The moment someone positions themselves as more qualified to interpret your emotions than you are, they've begun the process of psychological colonization. Your emotional responses belong to you. They're not up for debate or revision by others. 3. Recognize covert contracts. Never angry people often operate through unspoken agreements where their emotional control obligates your emotional suppression. Reject any relationship dynamic that requires you to edit your authentic responses to maintain someone else's comfort. 4. Practice transparent communication. Express your emotional responses directly and without apology. The never angry person relies on your self-censorship to maintain their psychological advantage. Clear, honest emotional communication disrupts their entire operational system. 5. Establish absolute boundaries. Decide what behaviors you will and won't tolerate, regardless of how reasonable the person appears or how calmly they violate your boundaries. Consistency matters more than justification. Jung's deeper insight was that the never angry person fears authentic emotional expression because it threatens their carefully constructed superiority. They need you to suppress your emotions to maintain the illusion that emotional suppression equals emotional mastery. When you respond to boundary violations with appropriate anger, you're not being destructive, you're being honest. When you refuse to moderate your emotional responses to make someone else comfortable, you're not being difficult, you're being authentic. The philosophical wisdom here transcends psychology. True power comes from internal validation, not external control. The never angry person seeks to control others because they've never learned to relate authentically to their own emotional experience. Their calm exterior masks the internal chaos that they project onto everyone around them. But you have a choice. You can continue participating in systems that reward emotional suppression and covert manipulation, or you can commit to authentic emotional expression regardless of how others respond. Here's what Jung knew that most people never grasp. The individual who can express anger appropriately is far more psychologically healthy than the individual who never expresses anger at all. Healthy anger is protective, clarifying, and boundary setting. Suppressed anger becomes resentment, manipulation, and covert aggression. You stand at a crossroads. You can continue admiring people for their ability to remain calm while they systematically undermine your psychological well-being. Or you can recognize emotional authenticity as the foundation of psychological freedom. The never angry person maintains their power through your complicity in the illusion that emotional suppression equals emotional evolution. The moment you refuse to suppress your authentic responses to their behavior, their entire system collapses. You don't need their approval. You don't need their validation. You don't need to prove that your emotional responses are reasonable to someone who's invested in convincing you they're not. Your liberation lies not in becoming like them, but in becoming authentically yourself. Someone who honors their emotional responses, sets clear boundaries, and refuses to participate in covert psychological warfare disguised as emotional maturity. The most terrifying people in the world fear nothing more than someone who cannot be manipulated into questioning their reality. Become that person.